That's where we're going to be. But here's what I want to kind of lead off with, and that is decisions equal destinations. Decisions equal destinations. And this is what God has been doing for the last 2,000 years. What he's been doing for 2,000 years through all this church history as he launched his movement through Jesus Christ. And watch this. In Matthew 16, verse 18, Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell, will not overpower it," would not prevail. That his movement would win. God launched this movement, and that movement changed all of history and is still changing the lives of people personally today in the 21st century. If you believe that, say amen. But this history is more than just history, because this history impacts all of eternity. This is kind of a big deal. Friends, decisions impact destinies. Destinies, all the choices we make impact our destiny. And I want you to realize that 20 years from now, your destination will be the summation of a series of decisions. Many of us have come to points in our lives where we realize, you know what, truth be told, I am heading in the wrong direction, but I can change that today. It is not too late. It's the summation of all these decisions. And if you have your Bibles, and I sure hope you do, Numbers 13 kind of lays this out. Numbers 13, Israel had come to this moment of great decision. And it was in that decision that it would define this long-term destination. Now, we're studying leadership through the life of Moses, and today's leadership principle, number 3, is true leaders don't try to save their lives, they give their lives. True leaders don't try to save their lives, they give their lives. Like in Numbers. Again, Numbers 13. Numbers 13, Moses, he's delivered Israel from Egyptian captivity. They fled from tyranny. He's led them through the wilderness on this journey, but now they're in the brink of crossing over into the promised land, this land that God had promised them. They're right in the brink of crossing over in Numbers 13, and for the record, Numbers, by the way, Numbers is like an appendix to the book of Exodus. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Torah or the Pentateuch. And Numbers is like the appendix to Exodus. So Moses is doing in Numbers, what he's doing is he's numbering his men for war. If you wonder why it's called Numbers, Moses is numbering his men for war. And so he's sent 12 spies out to scout this land, and they're on this mission of espionage, like kind of cool spies like us, whatever, this reconnaissance. And as the story goes, two of those men, Joshua and Caleb, come back. And they essentially say, hey, man, this place looks amazing. Let's go and take it since God gave it to us. Like God signed off on it, it's ours. Let's do this. But there were 10 of those 12 that came back and gave a bad report. While Joshua and Caleb were all gung-ho, super confident because of what God said, because of the promise of God, there were 10 that came back and says, we can't go there. Like there's some big old corn-fed boys up in there, right? I believe that's correct dialect. Anyway, but he says they say they're huge. We cannot win this fight. We cannot win. And so this decision to preserve their lives, to avoid struggle, to avoid relying on God to come through, to avoid the front lines at all costs, would in the end cost them their lives and all who followed them. You see, the influence of these 10 would cost an entire generation from the opportunity to see the promised land. And friends, it's true in our lives individually, and it's true of our families, and it's true of this church body, that decisions impact destinations. True leaders are willing to give their lives and sacrifice their lives. So let's pick this up. Let's pick this up in Numbers 13, starting in verse 1. This says, the Lord spoke to Moses. He said, send men to scout out this land of Canaan I am giving you. There's this promise. And mark those words, by the way. He says, I am giving. I am giving. There's a process. And so giving to the Israelites. Send one man who is a leader among each of their ancestral tribes. Moses sent all 12 of them from the wilderness of Paran to the Lord's command. And so when we read this whole text, which we don't have time to cover it all today, what they do is they're gone for 40 days. And incidentally, 40, if you haven't noticed, is a biblical number. It's this number of trial. 40 is the biblical number of tribulation. And so they were there for 40 days. God is trying them. God is testing them. He's testing Israel. And I think that's something that we kind of forget because we all want to gravitate towards the easy way out. But the truth is, Satan tempts and God tests. Satan tempts and God tests. And everything that Satan wants to use to tempt you to literally destroy your faith. The things that Satan will use, and many times to destroy you personally, are the same things God will use to test you. To do the opposite, to fortify your faith. To fortify your faith. And so back here in Exodus, they're gone for 40 days. It's not coincidental. I would contend it's providential. And now a report is coming back of what they saw. And so let's drop down to verse 26. It says, the men went back to Moses, Aaron, and the entire Israelite community in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. Now mark where they were, Kadesh. And I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. It says they brought back a report for them and the whole community, and they showed them the fruit of the land. They reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us, and indeed it's flowing with milk and honey, and here is some of its fruit. Now remember, God said, I'm giving you a land that will flow with milk and honey. You see, milk and honey, it wasn't literally a gallon of milk and a tub of honey. Milk and honey was, at that time, it's commodities of the wealthy. Milk and honey were these symbols of a land that was fruitful, it was bountiful, and it was plentiful. It was flowing with milk. If it was flowing with milk, it meant that you have lots of room and lots of flocks, lots of herds, which means you also have lots of property. That's what this means. And so if you had honey, it was because you had beautiful timber, right? Because it takes forests to have honeybees. And so God is saying this land will sustain you, essentially. He's saying it's beautiful, it's bountiful. And so they came back and they said, it's just like God described. It's amazing. And they say, here's some of the fruit. And if you read the whole text, it says they literally brought back a cluster of grapes that took 2 men to carry. Cluster of grapes that took 2 men to carry. These grapes were like the size of melons. This land was bountiful. This place was amazing. And it's just like God said it would be. Nevertheless, here it comes in verse 28. However, the people living in the land are strong, and the cities are large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites are living in the land of Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea along the Jordan. And then Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, let's go. Caleb says, let's go now and take possession of the land because we can certainly conquer it, like all team huddle here. And so what Caleb is doing here is he's using the principle of leadership we talked about last week. Caleb is inspiring hope. He's inspiring hope. So there are 10 guys that do not believe that God is able to perform what he promised. That's the bottom line. But here's Caleb. Caleb is trying to inspire hope. Like Caleb is like, wait a minute. What are you talking about? It's too hard. Wah. God promised it. Like God's already given it. So let's cross over and do it because it's ours already. It's ours already. And he says, he and Joshua, because of their belief, they're going to be the only 2 of those entire 12 that will ever cross over into the promised land. Brothers and sisters, Joshua and Caleb were outnumbered by 10. Joshua and Caleb were the minority. It was 2-10. 2-10. But listen carefully. Belief is contagious in church. Belief is contagious. Hope is contagious in church. But so is hopelessness. So is hopelessness. You know what's contagious in church? Disbelief. Disbelief. Church true leaders will use their influence to point people to God instead of away from God. They'll point people to the promises of God instead of telling them how hard those promises will be. They point people to the center of the group, not to the outskirts or the fringe. Check this out. Check this out. Right here, Caleb is pointing people to God. He's inspiring hope, and he literally says, God promised it. And so let's walk into our true identity. What do you say? What do you say? But in verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him responded, we can't attack the people because they're stronger than we are, Caleb. They said, we're not able. So let me ask you, brothers and sisters, you as a person right now, you don't have to say it out loud, but in your heart of hearts, are you an able person or are you a not able kind of person? When the Scooby-Lan hits the fan, when things get tough, are you an able person or a not able person? You see, this is so important. This says we can't attack the people because they're stronger than we are. Verse 32, so they gave a negative report to the Israelites about this land they had scouted, the land that God was promising them. The land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants. Ooh. And we saw all the people we saw in it are men of great size. We even saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. To ourselves, we seemed like grasshoppers, and we must have looked the same to them. Now listen carefully. Listen carefully. Right here, many of these folks are thinking, and even people listening, there's so many that read this and they hear about these people that made them look like grasshoppers, and they think this is just biblical mythology. There's no way giants once roamed the earth. These people were not making up what they saw. Do you understand that? And do you believe that today? They were not making up what they saw. The truth is, fear often embellishes, doesn't it? It embellishes the truth. It magnifies, it exaggerates the reality. They probably weren't literally the size of grasshoppers compared to these giants. It embellishes. But why is it almost all cultures record early history about giants? Why? Let me show you this. Let me show you this picture. This was something that was created and it was found, and it wasn't created by Bible thumpers. This is an ancient Egyptian, not Christian, 13th century BC document from the land of Canaan. It's on display in Great Britain. It's on display. And it's from this same time period that's describing this route that they're going through. And here's the translation about this, by the way, by an ancient Egyptian scholar. It says, the valley region is infested with shasu. Some of them are 4 cubits or 5 cubits from head to foot, fierce of faith, and their heart is not mild, meaning they're aggressive, and they hearken not to coaxing. Like it's dangerous even to be around them. In other words, they don't respond to reason. That's what these giants, these shasu, that are 4 to 5 cubits high. Look, 4 to 5 cubits would put these men around 8 to 9 foot tall. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you a grasshopper to them, but you sure feel like one, right? 8 to 9 foot tall, and this was in a time history where the average man was about 5 foot. Normal height people. And so if you're 5 foot tall, or 5 plus, yeah, and you're going hand-to-hand combat with someone who's like 6 foot or 6.5 foot tall, it's difficult but doable. It really is. But if you're going into hand-to-hand combat with someone who's 8 to 9 foot tall, you got a reason to be afraid. And really, if you're like me, in that moment, I'm really starting to question every decision I've made that's put me in this spot. But seriously, there's a reason 10 spies were afraid. They weren't crazy. Oh, we can push into they didn't believe, but how many of us have that same Christian atheism in the times we most need it? So sidebar, where'd these giants come from? Well, they're described actually in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, the Nephilim, giants. This says the Nephilim were on the earth both in those days, in the days of Noah, and afterward in the days of Exodus. And so when the sons of God came to the daughters of mankind who bore children to them. And so who are these sons of God? Okay, the Bible tells us, and listen, the Bible isn't hard to understand. It's just sometimes hard to believe. Let's be fair. It's not hard to understand. Like even those of us who actually believe the Bible, we have a tendency to try to explain away everything naturally, don't we? We do. But when the reality is we serve a supernatural God, and the Bible is a supernatural book that is riddled with supernatural events. And so who were the sons of God? Well, the Hebrew phrase is B'nai Elohim. And if we trace that phrase back to other places it's found, we see it in 3 other times. We see it in Job 1, Job 2, and Job 38. Each time we clearly see the context for the sons of God. The sons of God is angels, fallen angels. These are fallen angels. In fact, if we go to Job 38 right now, let's look at this. Job 38 verse 7 calls them morning stars. Morning stars. There was this race created by God before Adam's race, and they're the angelic race. And so what we have in Genesis 4 is an illegal union of fallen angels with women, which produced a hybrid race of giants that are recorded in almost every major religion and people group that have ever existed through those times. They're recorded. It's not made up. And so what does this have to do with you and I now in the 21st century? Well, listen carefully. We may not have a race of giants that we're going into hand-to-hand combat with daily or maybe ever, but there are giants in every single one of our lives. There's some imagery in this coupled with this story, with this history. And the imagery is that you and I have giants that many times seem taller than 8 or 9 foot. Giants that we're going toe-to-toe with. Friends, this story is our story, that God has delivered us out of bondage, and Jesus, just like Moses, is taking us on a journey. But do we believe his promises? This journey is called sanctification. Jesus called it a life abundantly, but most Christians get stuck halfway. Most Christians get stuck along the way. There are many Christians that have the gumption, that have the strength, that have the tenacity, or even the momentary sense of being to get themselves out of Egypt. They just don't make it into the promised land. The giant in your life is that thing in your life that keeps you from living that abundant life in Jesus Christ. And it is Satan. Satan has positioned those giants in our lives, magnified those giants in our lives, so that you'll get stuck, so that you'll stay stuck, so that I'll stay stuck and never cross into this true God-given destiny and destination and identity. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. Verse 14 says it like this: but thanks be to God who always leads us in Christ's triumphal procession. Meaning we can go in and take a hold of those promises. What about 1 Corinthians 15? 1 Corinthians 15 verse 57. And thanks be to God who gives us the victory. Gives us the victory. Why stop there? Go to John. Go to John 10:10. I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. And wait, let's go to 2 Corinthians again, chapter 3. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, there is liberty. It says it right here. Why are we not taking a hold of these promises? Instead of living with liberty, living these lives of abundance and living triumphantly and victorious, far too many of us stay in the wilderness of mediocrity. And it's my biggest fear. Mediocrity. No longer in Egypt. Like, we've gotten out of Egypt. We've gotten away from that slavery. But we're stuck and we're not feeling the joy, the freedom in the life with Jesus. Not really. We're stuck and we want to blame it on all kinds of surroundings. We're stuck and we don't know what to do. For far too many, this Christian life of joy is just theory or theology. We don't get to feel it practically. And Satan is positioning those giants in our lives for that very reason. You want to wonder why we keep going around in this cul-de-sac of stupidity? We keep falling to the same temptation. We kept leaning back to that same attitudinal thing. It's because Satan is propping up that giant in our lives. Friends, these men and women had enough faith to get out of Egypt, but not enough faith to get into the promised land. Do you know what they were? They were unbelieving believers. Unbelieving believers. Maybe there were people like some of us who wanted to believe, who really and truly in their heart of hearts wanted to believe. I mean, they believe in God. But because of their experiences, because of our experiences, because of all the letdowns we've had, all the disappointments we've felt, all the expectations that have not been met, all the expectations that we haven't lived up to, because of the attacks and the negativity, they really wanted to believe, but they can't keep from drifting to doubt. They can't keep from drifting to the negative slant. They can't keep from drifting or leaning into the devil's advocate, because it's all they've ever known. Habits are funny that way. They're a lot easier to talk about breaking than actually breaking. Friends, I've spent far too much of my life like that. And right here in history, an entire generation of believers who had the faith to take the first step, but not enough faith to take the next step. And so they got stuck halfway, and that's where so many Christians are today. We just get stuck. Yes, I think you believe you were forgiven. I think you believe that you're going to heaven. You have enough faith to get out of Egypt, but not enough faith to get into that promised land. You have enough faith to get into heaven, but some of us don't have enough faith to get through the day. Friends, there are times in our lives where we don't have enough faith to face that trial or tribulation, to face that giant in your life. And I'm not going to tell you you're crazy. I'm not going to tell you you're silly. I'm going to tell you, just like those 10, they have a reason to be afraid. Your giant is real. Your giant is real. The truth is, these men came back and they weren't lying. They saw giants. Oh, they embellished a little bit, they exaggerated, but they saw this race of people 8 to 9 foot tall, and they believed the situation looked impossible. Look, you have giants in your life. You do. Some of us have more than one. You're not making it up. I believe you wholeheartedly. I believe you that loneliness you feel isn't pretend. I believe you that depression that you battle isn't pretend. They are giants. And it's really easy for people to come alongside you and say, no, you can do it, Skipper. No. They're giants. That financial distress that you're sitting under the weight of, that loss of a job, the giant that's sitting right in the middle of your marriage that you're feeling helpless against. Giants are real. They're not pretend. But the problem for these ancient Hebrews is the same problem for so many of us today. We see the obstacles, but we lose sight of the opportunity. We see the obstacles, and we lose sight of the opportunity. We see the problem, but we forget God's promise. We see the size of the giant, but we lose sight of the size of our God. Yes, your problems can be big, but I'm telling you, I promise you, our God is bigger. Do you understand that Satan is positioning this giant in your life, and he's positioning giants in their land? An entire generation that got stuck halfway. That is the tragedy of Christianity, by the way. Right now in the 21st century today, so many Christians getting stuck halfway. Let me share two things. Two ways that Satan keeps us from crossing over into that promised land. Two ways Satan tries to ensure that we're going to be stuck. You see, we all have to go through this wilderness along the way to get to this problem or this promised land. But the point is that you don't have to stay in the wilderness. You don't have to stay in the wilderness. Ancient Israel chose to stay in the wilderness. That's their choice. We don't have to choose that. As many as 2 million people would die there, literally wandering in the wilderness. And that's a picture of so many of our lives today, just wandering in circles, doing the same patterns over and over again. And wonder why God isn't using us. Friends, Satan always uses fear and insecurity. Fear and insecurity. What he was doing through this race of giants was fear. Fear. And it was insecurity and anxiety, like this whole, no, we'll stay right here. We can't do that. Let me ask, what is it that keeps you from living a truly abundant life in Jesus? When you came in, there was a card on your seat. There was a card on your seat. You see, I felt a strong urge to create one more opportunity to say, not today, Satan, to these giants. Here's what I want you to do. If you're serious about getting out of that cul-de-sac, if you're serious about getting out of the circles, you see, one side of this card says impossibility or future reality. The other side is blank, and it is blank for you. For you to write down that thing, that giant in your life that has either seemed impossible to obtain or that giant that has kept you stuck. I want you to write that down. I want you to write that thing down that keeps you from truly stepping into the promised land. Is yours insecurity? Is it the broken expectations? Is it addiction? Is it a reoccurring temptation? Again, the merry-go-round of sensuality. Is it depression? Is it a broken relationship? Friends, these giants in our lives are real. And it's not till we put things down, till we make it real, that we can fight them in a real way. It can be rational to fear them. I think we get fear wrong. We need to learn to get over our fear. We need to learn to get over our fear. We have to get over ourselves. The truth is, when we become selfless, we become fearless. Leaders don't try to save themselves. They're not without fear. They don't try to preserve themselves. True leaders, and that might be in your family, are willing to give themselves up, to sacrifice themselves. Because as long as you're captivated by fear, you're making it all about you. That's where it is. Like, what will people think? If they really knew. Fear might say, what will it take? Do I have what it takes? Fear might say, well, what if I get rejected again? I don't know that I could take that. Fear might say, but what if I fail again? I have tried and I have tried and I have tried. What if I fail again? Friends, what is that giant in your life? Because listen, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the absence of self. It's self that props up and makes a big deal of this fear. This is what Jesus was teaching, by the way. Jesus was teaching in Luke chapter 9. In verse 23, Jesus said, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself. Absence of self. Because let's face it, following Jesus is scary sometimes, isn't it? The absence of self. Let him deny himself and take up his cross, that sacrifice daily. Oh, good, you did it for a week. Friends, the truth is it's daily. It's a daily struggle. It's a daily writing things down. It's a daily posting them up so I can see them. It's a daily reminding myself. It's a daily thing. This is the nature of truly being a follower of Jesus. The nature of truly being a Christian is a daily fight against these fears, a daily fight against these insecurities. This is what God is calling us to. And what we have here in Numbers is an entire generation trying to preserve their lives, afraid to go into battle because they don't believe God's promise. And so many of them are going to lose their lives. But had they not gotten stuck, they would have found their lives and they would have gone into the promised land. They would have gone after God's promise. Okay. Fear and insecurity. The second thing the devil does is not fear and insecurity. It's apathy and complacency. It's apathy and complacency. Listen, the devil is perfectly fine leaving you right where you are because in the wilderness, you're no threat to anyone, especially him. But you're also no good to anyone, especially you. You see, spiritually, you've been set free from captivity, but if you're still living like you're in captivity practically, what good is that? You're going to choose to live a life of mediocrity and in this wilderness sanctuary. Check this out. Here's what I want you to see. The devil is satisfied with leaving you alone and letting you camp at Kadesh Barnea, this wilderness sanctuary. You were made to move forward. I promise you that. You were made to move forward. But if you won't move forward, the devil wins when you camp at Kadesh Barnea. When you stay stuck in the place before the finish line. This is where we get stuck. You see, Kadesh Barnea was a desert oasis in an otherwise dry part of the world. And it had water in areas that didn't normally have water. And so for the next 40 years, these children of Israel camped there repeatedly because it was comfortable. They weren't a threat to anyone and no one was a threat to them. Oh, they'd get curious and wander from periodic times. They'd wander in a circle and end up right back where they started, camping at Kadesh. Do you understand the implication of that? And even in our lives, when the idolatry of security and apathy of choosing what is easy may feel like a sanctuary. But it's not. It's not a sanctuary. It's a place that will become your cemetery. Doing nothing is what's easy. Not a single one of you were called to easy. For 40 years in the wilderness, these Israelites They only fought one battle. Do you know that? The devil pretty much left them alone. I told you last week, sometimes slavery feels easier than liberty. Do you understand that it was in this sanctuary that it was easy? They got manna from heaven. They got water from rocks, literally. That part was easy. But do you understand that this is a picture of so many of us choosing lives of mediocrity above and beyond, limiting our true identity? I hinted at it a moment ago. Today I'm going to write on my card mediocrity. Because mediocrity is easy. It's easy to do nothing. It's easy to stay comfortable. It's easy to do at the most bare minimum. The next generation conquered that land. But this first generation, they took a step to get out of Egypt, but they failed over and over again to take the next step. They never got out of the wilderness. They had lots of to-do lists, lots of New Year's resolutions, lots of promises, lots of asks. Maybe for people to feed into them so they could get unstuck. Maybe they met people who they honestly said, I feel safe with. But they refused to follow them because that felt unsafe. For those of you that aren't getting that imagery, I'm talking about those of you right now who know full well that your way of going solo, your way of going alone has not worked for you. You've not only not grown, you've recessed. You've backslid. You depend on you, maybe just a few key people. But because people made you feel rejected at one time, you refuse to get connected in this time. My friends, I would call that Kadesh, because you were not meant to be alone. You were meant, like Patty, to go through something so incredibly horrifying and immediately in real time. Not just the people she figured would reach out, but there's so many people showering her with love, showering her with prayer. And she's here today as a prime example of what happens when you get the heck out of Kadesh and you get on mission. They never got out of the wilderness. It became their cemetery. Friends, whatever giant comes up that gets in our way, what won't change is the message. What won't change is the mission. What won't change are the methods that we're trying to push into. What will change are the means and the mechanisms by which we do things. There will always be a next step for not just your life, but a next step for our church. We will all have next steps. Friends, right now is a time to make a decision that has the power to impact your destination. Do you see it as silly and pointless? Where has that belief gotten you so far? Those that have refused an altar call, those that have refused connection, those that have refused accountability. Where has that gotten you staying in that wilderness? Get out of that cemetery. Jesus is great at bringing dead things back to life, isn't he? Get out of that cemetery. Make this real. Step up. Write something down. Make it real. Do the unexpected. Get uncomfortable. Impact your destination, and not just your destination, but future generations. We were talking with some friends last night that received a text, and they were just blown away, sharing it with us, how them stepping up in their faith has not just impacted their children, but so many families around them. Because of that decision, it impacted so many destinations. So at the very least, hey, Palm, cover up what you wrote. But hold that card up, because this represents the giant in your life. And again, mine is mediocrity. Mine is mediocrity. The giant you're facing is real. It's not pretend. But I want you to focus on the other side of this card, this future reality. That God takes what we think is impossible and He can turn it into a future reality. I want you to believe that nothing is impossible for our God. I want you to believe and actually say yes to God. I want you to believe in the promises of God. Church, you were made for a life of abundance. You really were. Now, abundance is not cash and prizes. Abundance is joy. Abundance is connection. Abundance is peace that surpasses all understanding. It's a time to step into our true identities and refuse to do what is easy. It's a time to refuse mediocrity. It's a time to refuse to choose apathy, to refuse to be satisfied by so little when Jesus is offering us so much. So in this time of making a decision, and I hope you take this opportunity, I hope you filled something out, I hope you wrote it, whether it be one word or a lot of words. Some of you have an armada of giants, it feels like, coming after you. Let's take this time right now to pray together. Would you stand?